Martin Ødegaard is finally back, and Arsenal just became title favourites. Maybe. There are three ways that Ødegaard changes Arsenal entirely. From the position on the pitch that he's most deadly in, to a player he can read almost telepathically. But first, we need to understand why Ødegaard changes the shape of Arsenal completely, because I didn't realise how bad they were without him. To understand why, we need to think in base formations. And with Ødegaard in the team, Arsenal would be in a 4-3-3. But teams change in possession. The front line would stay fairly similar, with Saka and Martinelli pulling wide, creating the width in the front line, with Havertz occupying that central striker role. Then the back line would shift more to a back three with Saliba centrally, and a fullback inverting into the midfield alongside a sitter. And then the two eights would step into these half spaces, and suddenly we have the classic 3-2-5 formation in possession that we see throughout Europe. And with Ødegaard in the team, this worked well, not only because it had been trained over the last 3 to 4 years, but because the transition from base formation to in possession structure was coherent with the personnel on the pitch. The back line had tall physical defenders, even if one of them was a left back, and the other fullback, Arsenal have specialised in buying players that can step into the midfield. The two eights were classic midfielders that were comfortable in these half spaces, and the front three kept their original roles, with Saka and Martinelli holding the width and Havertz being a classic number 9. This is why this idea works very well. But when Ødegaard is compromised and the second 8 in Alex Moreno got injured after one training session, suddenly this idea doesn't quite hit the same, because the base formation has to change. Again, I want to remind you that the base formation isn't often used in game, but it's a telling structure as to the personnel you have on the pitch. And without Ødegaard in the team, Arsenal focused more on a 4-4-2, something that they'd use out of possession, hence why it seemed as though Arsenal became more negative and defensive without their captain. So as Arsenal insisted on their 3-2-5 structure, that transition from base formation looked a little different. So now, with Havertz taken away from his number 9 duties for his partner Trossard or Jesus to focus more centrally, with an ever-rotating left winger, a Martinelli or a Sterling holding the width with Saka on the other side, and red cards and injuries affecting the back line and deep midfield, when they switch to more of a 3, sometimes we might see an inverting Partey from right back in the midfield, with Declan Rice pushing into this left-sided 8, and Havertz in the right-sided 8 as the replacement for Ødegaard. And this is the problem. With Trossard naturally being a left winger, having that left-sided bias, and Havertz wanting to affect the game centrally anyway, and hasn't really worked in those midfield spaces throughout his Arsenal career, it leaves Saka incredibly isolated, with not enough support and possession in this part of the pitch to hurt teams. And with the forced rotation of players and Arsenal persisting in being fluid in possession, when players are already in uncomfortable positions, it could lead to it all feeling slightly disjointed. And we can see versus Newcastle, that line of 5 actually looks too structured, too literal, and the players behind them completely disconnected from the play. But with Ødegaard in the team, suddenly the distances seem cuter, the spacing seems nicer, it all feels just a little more rhythmic. So is this the reason Ødegaard is the missing piece? No, there's still 2 more ways Ødegaard will change Arsenal now he's back. And at the end of the video, I'm going to tell you if I think Arsenal are title favourites. But first, I want to show you the part of the pitch Ødegaard is deadly in. 15 years ago, Ødegaard would have been a central number 10. he also would have been 9, so it would be a miracle if he was in the Premier League. So fast forward to 2024, he's now doing the bulk of his creative responsibility in this part of the pitch, because no longer is the space in central areas, just due to the amount of bodies and the compact nature of teams' shape in their low blocks. Now teams are looking to exploit spaces out wide, and Arsenal do it brilliantly with these wide triangles. The addition of the third man means Arsenal are never outnumbered in this position, and gives the defending team a question. Do they step out to the wide players, giving a problem to the centre-back as to whether or not he steps into Ødegaard, who, if left unimposed, is incredibly dangerous anywhere along this zone? But you have to remember that these three players are also constantly rotating, not occupying the same spaces. This is constantly causing problems, especially for this centre-back, whether or not he comes out and tries to cover this space in his own box, as very rarely are you going to see one of these central midfielders actually cover for the third man, as this leaves a big gap centrally. It's a brilliantly manipulative device used by Arteta and many managers throughout Europe. What makes Arsenal so special is the personnel within the wide triangles, and Ødegaard is so smart to pick up the right spaces, get into the right pockets, and also has the technical ability to operate in those tight spaces so that he can break almost any defence in the league. Now, before I tell you if I think Arsenal are title favourites, there's one other missing piece that Ødegaard offers to change Arsenal, and it's about his relationship with one player. He can almost read him telepathically. Bukayo Saka. Obviously, in these wide triangles, there is an element of player relationships happening there, but Ødegaard takes this relationship with his right winger to a whole nother level. See, Ødegaard actually drops a lot deeper into midfield, another asset that he has, but he's doing it for a very specific reason. As the ball lands with Timber, Ødegaard continues to stay narrow. He isn't tempted to drop deep or drop wide to try and get on the ball, but instead, by keeping that narrow positioning, enticing the midfield of Forest to stay narrow, it opens up a really nice passing lane for Saka, who can now isolate his fullback in a 1v1 situation. And a direct comparison can be made when Ødegaard isn't on the pitch. Versus Newcastle, as the ball is in the back line, Ødegaard is tempted to try and get on the ball, drops slightly deeper, drops wide, and blocks the passing lane to his right winger. And therefore Saka, who's in a brilliant position, doesn't get to isolate his fullback. He's no longer an option. And if he does get on the ball, the tempo and the rhythm of the passing is disrupted, just due to the amount of passes that you have to make to get in there. Ødegaard's relationship and understanding of Bukayo Saka is so brilliant to watch, and this example personifies it. We can see here when Leandro Trossard picks up that Ødegaard position, Saka makes his instinctive run inside across his fullback. Trossard doesn't oblige and continues to dribble with the ball, so Saka stops, adjusts his body, and now goes on the outside of his fullback, looking to be played in behind the line, and Trossard once again doesn't give him the ball and ends up just running into trouble. But with Ødegaard, as the Norwegian is surrounded on the edge of the box, he sees a pass that no one else can. He slots the ball in between those two players into the path of Saka, who's driven inside the pitch like we saw before, who can then produce a brilliant finish to open up the scoring. The change of shape, his ability in the half space, and his understanding of Bukayo Saka is why Ødegaard is the missing piece for Arsenal. And no doubt will Arsenal now become title challengers, but will they become title favourites? Now, with my team, Liverpool, also in the title race, I obviously don't want to call Arsenal the favourites. But what I will say is Arsenal look the most settled with Ødegaard. City have their obvious problems out of possession, in transition, and look nothing like their former selves, but Pep Guardiola always finds a way. Liverpool, no doubt, doubt, have been played through on occasion with their 4-2-4 press, but seem to be producing results week in, week out. And Arsenal, well, they should be here. They certainly have the most pressure on their shoulders, and pressure has seen them crack at times. But we're not talking about who's going to win the title. We're talking about who should be favourites for the title. And I think with Ødegaard in the team, the favourites are Arsenal.